Greetings everyone, I'm Kevin and here are my 15 favorite books of 2021. So I am aware that this video is a little bit late, but I struggle a lot with narrowing down the list. That's an issue. But I ended up with 15 books that I read for the first time in 2021 and I adored. And when I look back on my whole reading list of 2021, I was like, these books are amazing. I really adore all of these books. And I thought it would be fun if I go through them in order of month. So how I read them, like what month I read them. So the first book I read in February actually, and it's Czech Plays #hockey, the first book. I love this book. It's a graphic novel and it's like adorable. We're following a guy called Biddy and he's about to start university and he plays for like the hockey team, but he is kind of afraid of physical contact, and hockey is a contact sport. So that's that he has issues playing hockey because of that. But he starts off in this new team is very kind to him. He has a YouTube channel where he talks about baking because he loves baking, anything that has to do with baking. And on this is kind of through the perspective of him telling his followers about what is happening, what's going on, and he's like sharing new baking recipes while also sharing about what's going on at the university, in the team and stuff like that. And we also follow like behind the camera in that way as well. And I have to be honest, like it took me a while to get into the whole vlogging aspect of it, because it's just like some chapters just begin like, hi, I'm here, sorry it's been a while. Some chapters just begin with that and it feels very weird to me to read. It is a graphic novel, so to see like that setup, I would like, if you understand what I mean, the whole vlogging setup, like it took me a while to get into it, but I did really love this. I wasn't as interested in the baking parts as the hockey parts. This is also queer. Biddy is gay, he identifies as gay, and he falls in love with a teammate who Biddy thinks is straight, but we don't know. I mean, I know, but I don't want to spoil it. The romance in this, the whole like the characters in this, the friendships, all of that, amazing. I absolutely adore all of that. I read this for Polar Fun and it got me in such a hockey mood. I loved it. The next book I read was also in February, also for Polar Fun. And like, if you are not new to my channel, you have heard me talk about this book, and it's Frostblood. I adored this. Like, I didn't expect to love this book the way that I loved it. I was like, it took me by surprise. I expected it to be just, you know, a fantasy book, you know, the regular YA fantasy book. And I know that a lot of people say that with how YA fantasy books are today, you have read them all because they're so similar. But this one, I really loved this. We're following Ruby, who's a fireblood, and she lives in this place where everyone is a frostblood. And if you're not a frostblood, so if you're a fireblood, you are enemy number one. She has to struggle a lot hiding that she's a fireblood, but she, like, people find her out very early in the book. And she starts, like, she is put to prison, but a rebellion group kind of rescues her from the prison and takes her in as long as she will help them fight the king. So they want to overthrow the king, which sounds like it's such a fun read. And the romance in this, I also really loved. Like, it's kind of like an enemies to lovers in the sense that she hates him for being a frostblood and he hates her for being a fireblood. So they hate each other because of what they are, because they don't have, like, they don't trust the other kind. So Ruby, who grew up a fireblood in a world of frostbloods, she hasn't had that many good experiences with frostbloods. And the guy, he grew up as a frostblood with frostbloods, hearing about problems with firebloods. So he had that prejudice and kind of racism towards firebloods because of how he grew up and what he heard in his own experience with one Fireblood, I think it was just one, to get revenge. And I don't want to like go into too much about that, but it's like I just really loved the romance in this. This is a trilogy. I adore the second and third book as well, but this will just, it has such a special place in my heart, and I can't wait to reread this entire series. And then we're moving on to April with another book that, if you're not new to this channel, you have heard me talk about, and it's Dating Makes Perfect, my favorite YA romance. This is, if I have to be like very specific, it's best friends to enemies to fake dating to friends to lovers, and I love it. We're following this kind of traditional Thai family, and we have Winnie, who is the youngest of 3 siblings. She has 2 older sisters, and the older sisters are twins, and they're off to college. Their parents are like, now that you're in college, you can find good husbands, and you know, and the twins are like, they can't because they weren't allowed to date, so they don't know how to date and find husbands. So their parents decide to let Winnie fake date. So they set her up with a respectable boy from a Thai family that they know and trust, and he will help Winnie learn to be a good girlfriend. So she's not allowed to date. Actually, she's allowed to fake date just to learn how to date and be a good girlfriend. And the guy that they set her up with is, of course, the guy that she used to be best friends with, who suddenly started ignoring her. And she was so devastated when she was younger, when like her best friend, the person that she adored and loved spending time with, just suddenly avoided her. She thought that she did something wrong, and she thought that he hated her, and because she thought that he hated her, she did accidentally a bad thing, like a very childish thing when they were children, and that started this kind of rival enemy relationship between them, where they pranked each other and they just got on each other's nerves. And now fast forward, they're teenagers in high school. I think she's a junior or a senior, maybe, I don't remember. She is in high school, and she's kind of surprised and awkward that her parents chose this specific guy to help teach her to be a good girlfriend. And they're bickering and amazing. Their whole relationship, the whole dynamic between these two characters, I thought was so well done. And Winnie's so confused by the whole fake dating him thing, and I adore this book. I can't wait to reread it either. And then another book that I read in April is The Midnight Library. I adore this book as well. This, I think, is my 5th or 4th Matt Haig book that I loved. But this, I really love the whole like optimistic feel to this. So this book follows a girl called Nora who is very depressed and suicidal in the beginning of the book. So trigger warning for that. She actually has a suicide attempt very early on, and she wakes up in this library where the clock says midnight, and this librarian who is there tells her that all of these books are possible lives. So all of these, if you made one decision different, you could have ended up in this book or in that book or in that book. And there is also a book called the Book of, oh my god, what is that book called? Book of Regrets. And that book could help her figure out which book to dive into of a possible life. And like the whole thing in this is that she ends up loving her life. She ends up feeling like the more lives that she lived, the more possibilities that she went through and she saw, she starts figuring out that she loves life, and that it wasn't really that she didn't want to live. She just didn't want to live in this hamster wheel that she was going through. She wanted something to happen, something to change, but she felt so hopeless that she was suicidal and wanted to die. But through looking at all of these books, she realized that she wanted to live. She just didn't want to live the way that she did. I love the whole message of this book. All of Matt Haig's books are very optimistic, at the end, I have been very open about this. Like, I struggle with mental health issues for as long as I've lived, more or less. I have been hospitalized for suicide prevention, so I do really relate to Nora and what she goes through because I can see myself in what she went through. And this just was really, really beautiful. The next book is probably no surprise to anyone either, and I read this book in May, and it's Wonderscape. I love this. Like, oh my god, I adore this book. This kind of, like, how do I explain this? We have these three kids. This is a middle grade, a science fiction middle grade. We have these three kids who don't really know each other, but they go to the same school. And on their way to school, they hear a dog barking in this abandoned building. So they go in there to save the dog. And it's this really, really cute little dog. Like, there he is. And they decide they're gonna save this dog. And as they try to exit the building, they end up on this huge ship in the middle of a glacier. I think it's a glacier, or it's like a canyon, maybe something like that, or a fjord. But they end up in this big ship in the middle of nowhere, really, really far away from where they started. And they're like, what happened? And they find out that they're now in a game. And it's kind of like a virtual game, but not like this. They time travel 200 years into the future, 400 years into the future, into the year 2473. And in this time, games, you can travel within a game without like a VR thing or headsets or anything like that. You can just move through different game parts. And all of these different worlds, so all of these things that are floating here, they are worlds where with different games. So the first one was the whole thing with the chef, and they have to figure out the person who is in charge of that world. There are famous people from throughout history in these different worlds, and they are kind of like the, I don't remember what it's called, like the master of, or the hero. Yeah, the hero of the world, I think is the term that they use. And they have to figure out who that is, and there are different clues throughout the world, and you have all of these like different things and challenges that they have to go through. And I absolutely love this. It's kind of like, it's an adventure science fiction book, and these kids, they have to figure out not only how to survive the world and win the world to get to the next one and get like perks, but they also have to figure out how to get back home. And there is this plot behind all of this that I was so intrigued by. And there's like this bigger thing that I adore this book. And I really love the whole adventure game kind of aspect to it. All of the challenges in figuring out who people are and all of that. And I learned so much about different people. And this was just such a fun middle grade book to read. Then we move on to June, and the first book is Meet Cute Club, and I love that. This is a male-male romance, kind of like, not enemies, but they don't like each other, two lovers. So Jordan is in charge of this romance book club called the Meet Cute Club, and he went to the bookstore to get all of these romance books in several, for like different people. So he bought like one book in 4 copies of one book, and he did that for several books for his book club. And Rex, who's the love interest, he worked at the bookstore, and he's like very skeptical to romance books, like old lady book, grandma book, stuff like that. And they kind of get off on the wrong foot, basically because of that. And Rex actually ends up going to the book club, the Meet Cute Club, and they start talking and they get closer. This was so sweet and so like, I love this book so much. Like a romance book that involves romance books, perfection. Like I really, this was such a good time. It's very short, but it was just really, really beautiful to read. And also Rex is a child of toxic parents, and for me as a child of toxic parents, I love all the representation we can get. Then we have another book that I read in June, and it's This Time Will Be Different. And what I expected from this book is definitely not what the book actually was. it was better. We follow this girl called CJ, and she doesn't fit in. She does not reach her mother's approval. Like, she doesn't meet her mom's standards, and her mom is the daughter of Japanese immigrants, and CJ kind of struggles with that because she's not good in school. She's not good at anything, and the only thing that she has going for her is the family flower shop that her aunt has. And CJ is an apprentice at this flower shop, and she really enjoys it. Like, it's the one thing in her life that she feels like she's good at. And there's this thing in this book that I also really enjoyed, and it has to do with Japanese internment camps. So during the 40s, during World War II, people who were seen as the enemy in the US were put in internment camps. At the time, they were called concentration camps, but now they're called and referred to as internment camps. So the word used in this is internment camp. And CJ learns about the horrible history in this town in regards to how Japanese Americans were treated in the 40s. And if you had like a Japanese American who owned this, like a field of crops or something like that, they had to sell them for a very, very small amount of money because they couldn't keep them because they were sent to camp. And there was this company who took advantage of Japanese Americans at this time. And CJ kind of starts a movement to reach justice for the children and grandkids and great-grandkids of these Japanese Americans who were taken advantage of. And I thought that that whole thing, like the social justice part, her finding a passion, was so much fun to see and to read about. So I just really, really love this. I know that CJ is kind of seen as an unlikable character in a lot of ways. I usually say that if you've watched the series on Netflix called Never Have I Ever, CJ is like the main girl in that series. They kind of have the same kind of personality. Then we move on to August, and a favorite book from August is The Long Way to Small Angry Planet. This was so good. This was so good. So I had asked on Twitter for recommendations for science fiction books that would be good. Like, if you love Star Trek, you would enjoy these science fiction books. And a lot of people recommended this book or this series, so I picked it up and I loved it. Like, we followed this big cast of characters from all over the galaxy, and we see different cultures and different biologies of alien species, and it was so fun. Like, I love that with Star Trek, that it's the focus isn't on, you know, taking over a galaxy or a planet or anything like war, any kind of that, like no battles. It's the focus of Star Trek is the human aspect, humanity, having like empathy for others, learning about cultures and languages and people from around the galaxy. Like, that's the focus of Star Trek. Star Trek is literally people who want to discover more and learn more. They don't have soldiers. Like, my friend who loves Star Wars, we watched some Star Trek together, and he's like, so those guys are the soldiers, and I'm like, there are no soldiers. Soldiers aren't needed in that way. So like, no one is a soldier in Star Trek. How can you have like a science fiction without, you know, soldiers and war? And I love this because it's kind of like that. This has a focus on learning and discovering, and I love all of that with this. Like, you got to see so many different cultures and learn like linguistic aspects of those cultures as well. I just found that so interesting. Like, really, really interesting. Like, there is this species that I kind of stuck with me, that they are all born female. So everyone is born female. When you're a specific age, you get kids, and then as you age, you go male. So you have this, and this actually, like, there are actual species on Earth. So we have this on Earth as well, which I thought was very interesting. And that is something that I really love with this entire series. So we're not following the same characters throughout in each book. So this kind of introduces us to everyone, and then the different books focuses on specific characters. And I thought that was very interesting as well, that we get to focus on specific people, and that this was just an introduction to everyone and the world. And I really loved it, if you can't tell. Then we move on to September and to the largest, or not the largest, the tallest book on all of my bookcases. And it's Tänk dig att fly. This is very short. Like this is 30, it's 30, it's not even 30 pages long. It's 27 pages long. It's a tiny, tiny children's picture book. This is amazing. This is absolutely fantastic. I reread it just the other day, and I feel like every kid should have this book. And this, even like as an adult, I started crying reading this book. So the English title, even though as of today it doesn't have a translation in English, unfortunately, it was originally in Dutch, and I read the Swedish translation. It's the English title that the authors use on like Twitter and social media is On the Run. But this book in Swedish is Tänk dig att fly, which is imagine running or imagine fleeing, and it is a refugee story. So we see like this little girl, and the book is like, imagine your hometown is bombed and there's nothing anywhere anymore. Like your school is gone, everything is gone, and the only thing you can do is hope that there is a better place somewhere else. And we kind of see that whole story, that what refugees go through. And this hurt me so much because my grandpa was a refugee from Germany, and like this is basically what happened to the place where he lived. Like the bombs, the war, everything was gone. Like you can't live at home anymore because hey, it doesn't exist, you know, like all of that. So this impacted me a lot. And I also think that this is an important book to help people, kids and adults, to learn a refugee perspective in a way that is very simple. Everyone would understand what is happening in this book. Everyone would get it, I would say, because as it is a children's book, it is described in such a way that it's not complicated. It's very easy to understand what is happening, how it feels. Like it never tells you how to feel. It never tells you like, isn't it sad that? It just says that imagine it's like this and everything is like gone. Like just imagine that. And that's what is like so difficult to read. But I absolutely adore this book. And if you have access to it, like if it's translated to one of your languages, then I do really recommend reading it. And it's just such a powerful story. And I think with the kind of the views on immigrants and refugees today is something that I really want to work against, because I think that every refugee deserves safety. And I feel like if you can't for whatever reason stay in the place where you grew up, it's all you know, your home is there, your friends are there, your language is spoken there, like if you would leave that behind in hopes of finding a better place, then you belong here. Like I will welcome you. And I feel like this is important. This book is very important. Then we move on to October. Would like to meet. This was not what I expected it to be. I have to be honest. I did not expect this. We have Evie, who has kind of like, she works at this movie production studio, and they have this screenplay, and he won an Oscar, I think. And he was hired to write a rom-com. And the whole premise is that he doesn't really write rom-coms. He doesn't really believe in romance. And so Evie says that, okay, I'm gonna reenact popular meet cutes, and that will hopefully inspire you to write this rom-com. And I thought that the romance would be between those two, but it's not. And I love this romance. But this whole, like, the premise is so hilarious. I absolutely adore this book. Like, I couldn't stop reading it. It was such a fun read. It's one of my favorite romance books from 2021. I really loved it. The next book I read in November, and it's The Last Human. Another book that I absolutely adore. This is a hilarious middle grade. So we follow the perspectives of a robot, and he goes through his life as a robot very mechanically, explains how families work, how everything works, and then suddenly he finds a human, which is weird because they're extinct. Humans don't exist. Robots killed all the humans. So this can't be a human in front of him. It has to be a very advanced robot, but it's a human. And he's struggling a lot, like but that's a paradox. Like, humans don't exist, but you're here. So humans do exist, but they don't exist. And it's kind of like really messes with this robot. We have these 3 robots who are like so great. So great. I love the robots in this. And they decide that they're gonna help this human find other humans because apparently humans exist. They are not extinct. And it's just such a fun story. Like, it's kind of like an adventure story because these robots have to hide her from other robots because humans are number one threat to robots, so she has to die, but they have to like keep her safe and help her, and it's just so fun. It's so fun. So the next few books I read in December, and for my specific vlog that I did where I did like Advent reading, I was supposed to read 1 book a week. But I was sick, so it was very difficult. But it was still a lot of fun. But I read this book, One Christmas Kiss in Notting Hill. This was so fun. And I said in my vlog that if there's one book that I would like to read every single Christmas from now on, it's this book. This is a Christmas romance, obviously. We have our main character called Isla and this American guy called Chase Bryan, and they're in the same corporation, but he is in the New York office and he moves, or he travels to the London office with his 2 kids, his 2 daughters, and he has this big project to expand their business, and Isla is supposed to be his go-to girl and help him and teach him everything London and Notting Hill. She and her sister lives in Notting Hill. This also has great disability representation because Isla's sister Hannah is disabled from the waist down. She was in a car accident with her parents, or their parents. The parents died in the car accident, and Hannah became disabled from the waist down. And Hannah also has an adorable romance in this book, and I wish she had her own book with her own romance because she deserves it, but this is okay too. But the romance in this, both Hannah's and Isla's romance, are so adorable. And the whole issue with this expansion of the corporation was so intriguing and so problematic in the romance, but it was a lot of fun to read. It was super cute. It was just a lot of fun to read this book. Then we have another middle grade. I'm kind of happy that we had so many middle grades on this list, and it's The Serpent Secrets. It's the first book in the Kiranmala and the Kingdom Beyond series by Sayantanik Dasgupta, and it was so much fun. I love Kiranmala. The main character was so hilarious, and so like, she was just such a cool character to follow. And she is this Indian princess who grew up in the US, and she felt that her parents were just being, you know, annoying parents who called her their little princess, and she was like, I'm not princess, obviously. She was just so annoyed with them, and then she finds out that yeah, she's actually a princess, and she has like, her parents are gone, they're kind of kidnapped, and she has to travel to India with 2 dorks, 2 boys, and save her parents and figure out who she is. And this also has to do a lot with like Indian mythology and folklore and creatures and beings, and it was just such a fun adventure story, and I love mythology, so this was just a lot of fun to read. So the next 2 books that I have, I also read in December, and they're both mangas. So the first book is I Hear the Sunspot, and I just absolutely adore this manga. I think it was just so fun to read, and I immediately after reading this, I got the rest of the series and I read the rest of the series. But this was just so fun. It's a boys love manga, so it's male. It's set in a university. We have these 2 characters called Kohei and Taichi, and Kohei is disabled. He has very limited hearing, so he is legally deaf. And Taichi is this guy who he doesn't have his parents, he doesn't have a relationship to his parents, he only has his grandpa, so he lives with his grandpa, and Taichi is kind of struggling with money. He needs to work, but he also needs to go to university. And then he sees, like, walking in campus, he sees this poster that is be a note taker for a disabled person or a deaf person, and he goes out to meet Kohei, and he says that I'm gonna be your note taker now. So Taichi, despite not being the best at writing, takes takes notes for Kohei, and they quickly become friends, and I just really enjoy this series as a whole. It's a very slow burn romance, but I thought that the conversations about disability and what it's like and all of that was very interesting and very well done. Really love the series as a whole, the romance in it, the slow burn of it. I thought it was great. And the 15th and last book on my favorites, I also read in December, of course. It's My Love Mixup. This took me by surprise. I didn't expect to love this as much as I did. We follow a guy called Aoki, and he has this crush on a girl called Hashimoto, and they're in school together. I think it's kind of like a high school setting. In the beginning, they have to take like a test or something, and he realizes he doesn't have an eraser with him. So he asks Hashimoto, like, can I borrow your eraser? And so she gives him her eraser, and it has like this kind of paper thing around it, and he takes that off, like this eraser, so this thing. He takes that off, and underneath it says Ida. And he's like, you have a, like, the girl that Aoki has a crush on Ida, who is the guy sitting in front of Aoki. So they sit on like rows, and he's sitting like one row closer to the teacher. And Aoki's like, oh my god, okay. And Ida, because sometimes teachers like give a bunch of papers to the first row students and they bring them back to the next students. So Ida did that, and accidentally the eraser fell to the floor. And Ida kind of picks it up and is like, why is my name with a heart on it on your eraser? Aoki is just like, it's not mine. And then he's like, I can't tell him that it's Hashimoto's, because if she doesn't want to tell him that she has a crush on him, she shouldn't be forced to. He was trying to be very mindful of her. It was like, it's not mine. And Ida is like, okay, so whose is it? And Aoki's just like, and he's like, okay, fine, it's mine. Because he felt like it was better to pretend that it was his than say that it was Hashimoto's. And then kind of like, Ida is the best love interest character, like absolutely fantastic. He's like, okay, and he tries to get to know Aoki and become friends with him and do things with Aoki, and he's like, I don't have an answer for you yet, so we can just spend time together and I will let you know later. And Aoki's just like, why does he have to be so respectful and kind? And Aoki wants to tell him that it's not his eraser, that it was actually Hashimoto's, but he does, as like, again, he didn't want to put her on the spot, so instead he tries to act like a wingman between those two and be like, oh, you can go help Hashimoto, she needs some help. And Ida's like, okay, and he helps Hashimoto, and of course it ends up with one of them falling in love with the other. This is a series. There are more books to come out. I have pre-ordered the second, the third, and the fourth book. So yeah, I hope I am going to receive the second book quickly. It moved from, it used to have, when I pre-ordered it, it had its release date in January, but it has moved to March. I don't really know why. So I have to wait a little bit longer to get it. But this, was such a fun read. Okay, so there we have it. Those are the 15 books I love the most of 2021. And have you read any of these? Please let me know what you thought. Do you have any recommendations for me based on my list? Maybe you know a book that you feel like the way that I described why I loved a book, you think I might like this other book. Like, please let me know if you have any recommendations as well. And I will see you next time. Good reading. Bye.